It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to Mr. Sanjay Kaul, who is the Managing Director of NCMSL. NCMSL stands for National Collateral Management Services Limited. While the name sounds very complicated, it's a very interesting organization, and I have begun to understand a wee bit about this organization very recently. This is the subsidiary of the biggest agricultural commodities exchange in India. There's National Stock Exchange, which is for the stocks. There's a commodity exchange called NCDEX, and NCMSL is a warehousing subsidiary of that commodity exchange. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have thought a warehousing subsidiary of a commodity exchange was just a warehousing company. I would possibly not have understood the strategic significance that such a company would have, and the critically strategic role that its managing director would play in the field of food security. A lot of change started taking place when last year, if you remember, the Supreme Court was quite annoyed at the fact that a lot of food grain got damaged, either because of rain or because of poor storage. And the Supreme Court mentioned that if you cannot store the grain, give it free to the people, because there are enough people who are dying of hunger. All of a sudden, warehousing and storage of grains became important. Sometime in October last year, 2010 that is, the government finally notified an act called the Warehousing Development Regulation Act. And that was when I met Mr. Kaul. And that was perhaps my initial attempts to understand the strategic significance of the act and of NCMSL in the business of food security. Mr. Kaul has been with the Agriculture Ministry. He's the Managing Director of this strategic division, which is very closely associated with any plans this country may have in the field of food security. I invite Mr. Kaul to speak, and after that, Mr. Sudhindra Kulkarni, who is the Chairman of ORF, will offer his concluding remarks. Mr. Kaul.
Bhaskar, for this very flattering introduction. Just a few words before I make a formal beginning to my presentation. I am really not an agronomist. So, the questions that you were asking about pesticide residues, I can try and make an unintelligent guess, but I'm not really an expert on that. And I would not be covering the area of warehousing and the commodity futures market. But certainly, if those of you are interested as critical issues relating to this area, I would be very glad to interact with you. The focus of my presentation would be on the India situation and how it stands today in the context of a lot of media debate on the food security bill. And therefore, the issues of right to food, to what extent the policy imperatives are within the realm of realization, and what could be different policy options. I was a civil servant, and I've now shifted to the corporate sector. So perhaps certain prejudices have, mindsets have changed. So forgive me if my ideas do not agree with yours, but that's the whole idea of provoking a debate. So this would be somewhat a kind of a corporate way of looking at this issue. But then to those of you who are activists, you'd look at what the other side is saying. So take all of what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, and please use this for more active debate. What is the food grains demand in the country? How close are we to achieving, both at the national level and at the household level, So these are two different kind of oceans in the matter of achieving what is being generally spoken of as right to food. And then the delivery system. The whole problem of the country seems to be not lack of self-sufficiency in food, but its delivery system. And the policy instrument the government has been sticking to over the last 40, 50 years has been the public distribution system. And the new bill also envisages the PDS as a main instrument for delivering food security. And I am going to provoke you in saying that this doesn't seem to be the answer. So that's where assessment of the PDS, and if there is to be a reform of the PDS, then what are the options for the government? But broadly, this is what I will be covering. Now, if you see the agriculture scenario in the country, and you see yields of principal Indian crops, as rice and wheat, accounts for about 75-80% of the total production. The productivity is surprisingly very high in China, much higher than the world average. In an economy which about 25, 30 years back was not considered very suitable for agriculture. In the case of wheat, by global standards we have not done poorly, and partly because Punjab and Haryana have yields which are quite high. But compared to China, we still have a long way to go. Since our yield levels have been low, we've had relatively low growth in food grains production because your cropped area has limited scope for expansion. Yes, there are areas where you can have a second crop. Large parts of the country are still rain-fed. There's a potential for a second crop. But apart from that, there seems to be the only way to grow is to improve our yield situation. And rice, the average growth rate since last 15 years has been 1.27% for rice, wheat 1.4%, total food crops 2%. So no wonder that your agriculture production as a whole, the growth rate has been around 2% because yield levels haven't gone up, cropped areas are stagnant, so there's no way that you can grow faster. What also seems to be a concern, there's large parts of eastern India, central India and the northeast. The yield levels are much lower than the national average. And Assam, Bihar, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh and West Bengal, these also have an impact on the household security because these are principally also the poorer part of the country. So not only they have lower yields, these are also areas where rural incomes are also lower. And that disparity therefore gets accentuated between the better off states and these states. There's nothing new that I'm saying here. There's been low input use, limited expansion of farm infrastructure. So marketing linkages, incentive to produce more, warehousing is a constraint. But I think if all economists and agriculturists accept that one fundamental reason why growth rates have stagnated is because investment into agriculture has been virtually very low. So capital formation hasn't taken place. The small marginal farmer doesn't have the surpluses to invest into agriculture. There are no great public investment programs in the area of agriculture. 0.6% of GDP is one of the lowest that you have in emerging economies. Agriculture credit has moved up to about 4 lakh crores. It sounds good, but if you speak to a large number of small and marginal farmers, access to credit is a major issue. Bank finance has not really reached because a lot of them have become defaulters. You had alternative sources of finance like the microfinance institutions, that's also come under a cloud. So institutionalized credit to the rural economy has been limited. We have got institutions like the ICAR producing technology and seeds, but it's not yet reached farmlands. And market linkages have been very limited. We have seen for ourselves that agriculture produce marketing committees were supposed to be proactive in offering marketing opportunities to farmers. And we can spend some time during the discussion, say how farmers have become bonded to those markets. They are told that they must sell only in that market and not outside. So rather than opening up opportunities, they have become restrictive and limiting factors. A study has been done, and it is published. I can share that paper, that if you can increase low productivity regions to the national average, not to the global average, not to China, but to the national Indian average, you can have a huge increase in food grains production. And the estimates are rice you can increase by 39 million tons, wheat 30 million tons, total cereals by 77 million tons, pulses by 4, so total food grains production 81, which means a 40% increase just by ensuring that you are able to raise yield levels to national levels. And of course, national levels going up to China or global standards you have, so there is certainly an opportunity. Without spending more, just critical reforms, and this is the corporate viewpoint, opening up markets can unleash huge investments by the private sector. We are not talking of Reliance being permitted to buy farmlands, but we are saying that you open out the private sector to allowing them to trade freely, provide market linkages, provide processing activities, by reforming the way agriculture marketing is permitted in India. It's one of the most restrictive. We went through a phase in the 60s, 70s when industrial licenses acted as a fetter to growth. Now we are seeing the same situation in agriculture, where agriculture marketing, the restrictive movement of licensing systems and the stock limits, they're acting as fetters to growth of agriculture marketing infrastructure. You have instruments being developed by the government of India to permit contract farming, so that large end users, processors, corporates can directly contract with farmers. But there's so many mindsets and misgivings that you don't have a good regulatory system which will give confidence both to the buyer and the farmer who's a seller. So if you can have an open, transparent contracting farming things, it can open a lot of opportunities. There are some states like Punjab which have been proactive in going forward in this. So you have companies like PepsiCo which has permitted contract farming in, say, tomatoes. But as a country, contract farming has been very limited. Now this is of course debatable. But studies do seem to feel that on the supply chain, and as we were discussing just before, if you can have large organized retail, whether through or without FDI, it can lead to large supply chain efficiencies. And we are seeing this in our own agri-businesses, that the presence of Metro Cash and Carry, which is not a foreign investor, Bharati, they have changed the way things are being done. And they're insisting on quality produce, graded produce, standardized produce, and that itself is bringing in efficiencies. Including for the farmer, because he is told that if you produce a certain quality and grade, you'll get a better price. Because there's a discerning consumer at the end of the value chain. There are restrictions or limitations to what government budgets can provide for investments. Our view is that if you open up markets, private sector will itself step up investments. And from 0.6% of GDP, you can grow up to 2% of investment in agriculture, and that itself will lead to a step up in the agriculture production. There are very limited budgets in India, in the government of India, for what are called watershed development, dry land agriculture. Now 40% of Indian agriculture is rain-fed, which means that you have a single crop. So you have land mass which is not producing. And these are, if you map this with the poorer regions, you'll find a very good mapping, close mapping. We feel there are huge opportunities for growth there. And there's much greater investment and opportunities in both extension technology, good varietal of seeds, in more cost-effective use of the limited water that is available in these areas for stepping up production and yields. I, for one, also believe that huge government resources can be moved into more concrete investments in agriculture by food and fertilizer policy reforms. This is a contentious part. So what I am suggesting is that the lot of siphoning off or non-targeted government expenditures in areas on food and fertilizer, if they can be better utilized for direct investment to agriculture, can release funds, because there has been a paucity of capital formation in agriculture, which has led to stagnant agriculture. So unless you have resources into agriculture, because please remember, the agrarian community doesn't have those surpluses. It's not like Russia or Ukraine or the US or the Latino farmers who have large surpluses they generate and they can plow back. You have subsistence farming. So you have to have either the private corporate investment around, or you have to have a public investment. And we feel that about 1% of GDP can come through these two instruments alone, of ensuring there's better use of food and fertilizer subsidy. And I've spent some portion of my presentation on the food reforms which I'm talking about. Let's move to the demand side. So this was on the supply side. Let's move to the demand side. This is a standard norm that we use for rural calorie requirement, 2,400 calories per capita per day. But then the debate is this a good measure to determine adequacy of nutrition? The bottom end is not what you eat or what the intake is. What is the nutritional outcome? And therefore, a lot of nutritionists say that I'm not really concerned with what households are eating. I'm more concerned with the nutritional status of the Indian child, the Indian household. And therefore, as an academic part, it's better to have a measure of the nutritional status of households rather than doing an NSSO expenditure assessment of how much is the intake, how much is he consuming. It's irrelevant. A sedentary person doesn't require, somebody like me doesn't require to eat, but the nutritional outcome is what is critical. So rather than input, you measure the outcomes, and this is what people are saying across sectors. Education is not important what you invest in. You can build in investments in education, but if the quality of teaching, learning and the outcomes are poor, then that amount of investment is of no use. So similarly in this area. Okay, so this is the question which is critical. What do we really eat? And the food grain demand is linked to what we eat. This is the latest available 2005-06 NSSO round. This is 67nd round, household expenditure on food. If you really want to know what we are spending today, you add a factor of about 65-70%. The wholesale price index has moved about 60-70 points, the base of 100. So you add 70% to this, 60 to 70%, and you'll get a rough indicator as if the survey were to be done today, except you'll find that some shifts would have taken place in the dietary pattern if you were to do a survey today. But let's take the survey as it exists today. So cereals occupies about 1/3 of the food intake and about 1/6 of the total consumption of a household. So cereals is about 1/6 of the total household consumption and 1/3 of a rural household's expenditure on food. So even if you were to supply him his full food grain requirement, he'd still have a paucity of 2/3 of his food requirement, because it's not coming from cereals. It's coming from milk, it's coming from edible oils, it's coming from vegetables, it's coming from other processed foods. And when you look at the urban household, the cereals occupies only 1/4 of, and I'm not talking of the middle class, I'm talking of averaging out for all households. So middle class, the percentage would be even lower, maybe 1/5. So this is urban across the country. This is 30% of India's population. So only 1/4 of what you eat is cereals. Milk and milk products is 85, and that's why this whole the wholesale price index is a basket of in the food category, it's about 22% weightage. It gives you that kind of weightage based on what you eat. And that's why food inflation in the last 1 year was not contributed by inflation in cereals. In fact, rice and wheat, there was 1% inflation through the year. It was contributed by increase in prices of milk and milk products, 14-15%, vegetables were 20%, edible oil, 60% of it is imported. So it was contributed by non-cereal items. I mention this background because when you're talking of a food security bill, which is only focusing on cereals, you're going to have an issue. Because you had self-sufficiency in cereals, you don't have such a critical problem today of cereals. Now, this is a general consensus of economists who made assessments of food demand in 2007, what demand is today and what it's likely to be, say, in 2020. So then you can make out whether what the gap in India is between the supply side and the demand side. The economists like G.S. Bhalla, who were one of the prime estimates, a planning commission had commissioned some studies. So the context of the 11th plan. So this was the, you'll see these figures more or less matching this. Rice, 2020, 119. How much did we produce today? Exactly 97. 2010-11 revised estimates in 97. So you have, again, broadly in rice we have been self-sufficient. Wheat, in fact, we are supposed to be projected to be growing 84. So there's, in this sense, a consumption demand of 75 against which you are producing 80-85. So you have well on line even to meet 2020 requirements. Certainly rice, there seems to be some gap, but not so much in wheat. Other cereals, as a percentage of total cereal consumption, is going down. Bajra, millets, whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm just talking of the demand. It's projected to go up to 21. Maize alone this year is supposed to be 14 million tons. So you don't seem to have a problem with cereals, if you go by these demand estimates. Milk and milk products, huge increase projected of up to 166 million tons. Now, this is a huge gap. If we focus on food grains, we are not talking about milk and milk products. And they contribute about, I think milk and milk products contribute about 15-20% of the food basket. Edible oils, you have a problem because there doesn't seem to be any growth in oilseed production in India. Little initiatives in the budget, you've talked about this palm oil in 5,000 acres. That's not going to really make a major national impact. Meat and fish, you have a gap. Sugar, you are 23, 24 today. Again, doesn't seem to be a major problem. Fruits and vegetables, again, you have a major gap.
Could you explain pulses?
Pulses is supposed to move up from 15 million tons to 20 million tons. We have been producing about 12. So you have a 2-3 million ton shortfall already. That's likely to go up to 5-6 million tons because you see the trend of pulse production last 10 years, it's been virtually stagnant. And the difficulty has been that except for countries like Canada, Tanzania, Myanmar, you don't have really countries which are producing pulse production in large measure. It's used as cattle feed elsewhere. It's only in India that's pulses. So that's why it's not considered as such a critical value crop. So they have been talking about India doing contract farming in North Africa, asking them to go in for pulse production with a buyback kind of commitment. In fact, we attended a meeting at FICCI with the African countries, but the issues of law and order and other kind of mafia that operates in several parts of Africa is really acting as constraints to us investing and taking this kind of long-term call. So pulses is certainly a major problem for India. So if you see the growth rate up to 2020, cereals growth is likely to go up year to year only 2%. Edible oils 4%, meat, fish, milk, fruit, vegetables 4 to 5%. And that is where the challenges are coming. that you're seeing food inflation and you're talking of supply side problems, not on so much on the cereal side, but more on other food products. So in summary, cereal supply could easily match demand if identified growth strategies are applied. We talked about the first of matching growth yields in the, so that they, at least there's a lot of realism if you were to say I'd be able to meet my food grains demand. But there's the concerted focus on meat, fish, milk, fruits and vegetables, which I feel in the whole policy debate on food, it's been missing. Though it certainly came to light during the last 1 year, and therefore the budget is talking about cold chains, focusing on fruits and vegetables, providing incentives for warehousing, post-harvest infrastructure. But hitherto, this has been a huge neglected area. Also look at what's happened to consumption patterns. Now, if you see from 1970 to 2005-06, when the latest NSSO round took place, per capita consumption of cereals has declined by around 0.7% per annum. Now, food activists point this out and say, this is where the crisis is, your cereal demand has come down, your cereal consumption has come down, people are starving. And my submission is it's not necessarily a bad thing. You have to look deeper. And if it is attributable to change in favor of non-cereal food, then you don't have a concern. But if the total intake and outcomes have got negatively impacted, then you have a concern. Why is it a concern? Because bottom 30% of the Indian rural population has an energy intake of only 1700 calories against your norm of 2400. It's not a concern in absolute terms, but you have a concern because it doesn't seem to have been made up by adequate energy intake on the non-cereal side. If it had been compensated, we wouldn't have had a problem. We do have a problem. But it's not necessarily because of diets have shifted, it's because in terms of energy intake, it's gone down. Now, if you were to focus on this bottom 30%, 35% of the population, which has lower intake, and you were to meet this 2,400 calorie gap, how much do you require? You require 10 million tons of grain annually to be given to them. How much are we giving to the PDS? 45 million tons. So this is a result of 30 years of PDS. We've been giving 30-40 million tons. The gap, identified gap, if there was a really directly to go to households who need it, you require, the gap is to cover this 2,500, 400 to 1,700. So there's obviously some problem. You are giving 45 million tons, the gap is only 10 million. Nutrition outcomes are not improving. And what are these outcomes? Levels of malnutrition, this is across the board, everybody accepts, higher than in sub-Sahara countries, especially for children, 0 to 5, 45% of Indian children remain malnourished. And it's a major issue because a child doesn't require more than 400-500 calories. It's more issues of nutritional education to the household, the right time of foods being made available to the child. And there's a decline from 62% in 75, but 75 is 30 years away. We should have been down to 10%, 15%. So 62% of children were malnourished. Today they're 40%. What is even worse is that adults, the chronic energy deficiency, that's a measure that nutritionists measure, 40% of adults have what they call a CD deficit, a chronic energy deficiency. No, that was
India base.
Yeah, this is all India data.
What it means the sub-Saharan countries.
Sub-Saharan countries, the under 5 children, malnutrition levels are better. The under 5 malnutrition levels are much worse in India than in sub-Saharan Africa.
So, but how should we meet this demand? How should we bring down?
Wait. Just wait. Okay. So therefore, when you're talking of the issue, of the demand. We're talking about the national level, and we see that at the national level, we seem to have done all right. Your food grain demand, supply is more or less getting matching. Your cereal production is close to demand. So there doesn't seem to be such a critical level of cereal production in the country. We achieved self-sufficiency. I think Lal Bahadur Shastri talked about sacrificing one meal, but thereafter we've been talking of, through the 80s, 90s, post-Green Revolution, reasonable self-sufficiency. We've had to import food, but it's been a sporadic, once in 5 year kind of exercise. Broadly, we have attained self-sufficiency in food grains. If you take the India situation today, you have 25 million tons of rice and wheat excess beyond very, very liberal buffer stocking norms. There's more than your 45 million PDS requirement annually. You have sitting with 25 million tons of excess stocks. And at the household level, almost half of households are food insecure. National level, there is food security. So that's basically the paradox that we are facing in India. So obviously, if you see what Amartya Sen talked about, the Bengal famine, is not availability, but the households who required it didn't have access to food. A key factor to our mind is not availability, but income of poor households, their inability to buy. And why PDS is not being able to address, we'll come to now. This is a Planning Commission survey. I don't know whether any of you came across today's editorial by Kirit Parikh on kerosene. Now, he's talked about 1/3 of kerosene being siphoned off. The Planning Commission survey on the PDS is even more damaging. It says that 58% of food grains do not reach poor households. Now, there are two reasons. All of it is not getting siphoned off, but it is going to households who do not need it. So there are two problems. One is a wrong identification, that poor households get left out of the PDS and rich households get themselves included because they are more influential at the panchayat level. And the second component is the leakage and diversion. So if you sum up the two, it comes to 58%. This is Montague Ahluwalia's preface to that report. This is not mine. So for 1 rupee of income transfer to a poor household, government spends 3.65 rupees. So 1 rupee that the government spends is worth 27 paisa to the poor. And despite covering 8 crore households, the survey found that 57% of poor households are not covered under PDS. This is of course a dated survey. Some more households may have got included. There are some states which have done well. But I wouldn't be surprised if a large chunk of poor households still remain outside the ambit of the PDS. The siphoning off is 36%, and above poverty line households getting 21% of subsidy. So these two are making up the 58%. The inefficiency of the PDS is not just in the siphoning and the leakage. If you ask a trader, you can get wheat at 12 rupees, but the government, when it supplies wheat, its economic cost is something like 17, 18 rupees. So there's again a 1/3 additional cost incurred when you have government systems delivering food grains. We'll come to. That's why I'll give the private sector perspective on how we can do it the same thing better. And we did work in tribal districts of Odisha, Bihar. We procured for the government at a saving of 10%. So we did about 500 million directly procuring from farmers. So we can spend some time on that. So in 2010-11, the estimated food subsidy was 55,000 crores. So if you go by these kind of statistics, annually you are wrongly spending 31,000 crores. And this is cumulative. It's not a one-time. 2G, 3G was a one-time Raja episode. It's gone. This is an annual thing. So in that sense, it's much higher because it's recurring and cumulative. It's a perennial. Okay, now what to do? Now I am submitting 3 policy options, and I'll end there.
What about the families who are in abject poverty?
So what to do with that? Surprisingly, what the survey also pointed out, and that when it came to Antodaya households, the leakages was much less. So, there is some merit in the government's latest scheme of really pricing it very low, because on the demand side, there's much greater awareness of. So the people in abject poverty, the NDA government had introduced, and was continued with this government, of identifying the 1 million poorest households. And surprisingly, you found that in terms of identification, there were much better identification. May not have been the most abject poor, but no rich person got himself to vote and say that he is not an Antodaya household. And leakage levels were much lower.
Spend 5 rupees per kilo for that rice. You expect 50 kilos for him to pay 50 kilos per person. How do you expect that to happen?
I don't expect that to happen. So I'm saying that three options for reform. One is that you replace this leaky, wrongly targeted PDS with income transfer to poor households. I was the last person to replace food with cash, but increasingly data and evidence seems to be pointing out that delivery systems in India are not working. If you read the Finance Minister's budget speech, he has suggested that for 2-3 items, we should use the UID as a base and see whether we can use income transfer for 2 components they're looking at. That's for kerosene and for fertilizer. I don't know whether it works. But I am saying that there is time to at least see whether the mandate of this committee should also cover food. Now, there are a lot of issues and emotional issues about replacing food with cash.
No, not cash, but each person should get.
Yeah, wait. I'm coming. So this is one radical thing you scrap. I'm saying this is not the only option. This is not the only option.
No, they can be given rice.
Just hang on. I'm almost through. So this is one radical suggestion, that you scrap the PDS, you identify this lady that you're talking about and give her 1,000 rupees a month. Okay. Then she goes to the market and she buys a grain.
Will you just wait? Let him finish. After that, just wait.
These are also mindsets that she'll spend it on alcohol. Why should you presume that she's not rational?
They don't in Mexico.
All consumer behavior studies show that Indian households, like households everywhere, are very rational. She may spend the first month in alcohol, the second month she may not. So they do look into. So I know we can debate about it. So this is one option. The second is, why does leakage take place? The leakage takes place because you are supplying to the private ration shopkeeper a grain which is worth 15 rupees at 3 rupees. And you expect that he should be honest and he should deliver that subsidy honestly to the poor household. Now, he is a businessman. He sees a huge arbitrage. He says that this is grain, its value is 15 rupees. If I don't give it, I can save 12 rupees. So inherent in the PDS is a huge arbitrage opportunity that you have created. And if people have business acumen and they don't have any fear of being caught, he would do it. And in most states, what tends to happen is that the inspector colludes. So then you have a kind of a system where each is rubbing each other's back, and you have in perpetuity a system of siphoning and leakage. So the proposal is that you give to fair price shops at 15 rupees. You tell him that the household will give you a food carbon coupon. You could have a smart card, you could have a debit card. You give me evidence that this household has received this grain, and I will give you that 12 rupees. So the household gets it at 3 rupees, the shopkeeper gets it at 15 rupees, 12 rupees he gets through a bank transfer based on the coupons that he has produced. So this is also difficult, it requires a lot of technology, but this is an option which you're saying you're not dismantling the physical side of the PDS system, but you're removing the incentive for leakage and diversion. You're removing the arbitrage. Now third is that you live with the PDS, and this is something we should need to look at, because this is what the government is likely to do. Government is not likely to dismantle the PDS. It's not likely to introduce this food coupons in a large way, except in a piloting. So you're living with the PDS. There we are saying two things, or rather three things. One, we are saying that for this, delivering the grain to states and taluk levels, you can leverage efficiencies of the private sector. Lot of the extra money that the surveys are pointing out are not on account of leakage or siphoning, are on an inherent difficulties which government structures, and I've been part of that for 25 years, face. As a result, their costs become higher. Manpower costs may be higher, organized union activity, whatever, logistics, leakages, corruption, and name it. So you can use, the corporates outsource their activities to other corporates. So the government can certainly outsource a lot of its activities of storage, of procurement, of logistics to private sector. And our assessment is at a minimum about 10% of subsidies, which is for 4,000-5,000 crores, can be saved if you progressively use efficiencies. I'm not saying you transfer all your liabilities or responsibilities, but wherever you find that you have efficient alternatives available, you are not dismantling the PDS, you're not dismantling the social security fabric of the country. All you're doing is that you're doing things best in the interest of the poor household. Because right now, the interest of the poor household, it's the corrupt inspector, the corrupt official, the Food Corporation of India who's making money. That's nobody's mandate. The poor household is not saying that it's in my interest that you alone do it. They want the best way of, most efficient way of reaching the household. So we are saying that there are areas of inefficiency in the government system which can be looked at. Secondly, surveys of households seems to be the major chronic bottleneck of poor households not getting out. Now you need to find out some ways of having an external, independent, credible institutions doing the survey so that genuine poor households get into the net and outsiders don't. The third thing is that wherever state governments have done door delivery of grain to the fair price shop, to the village, leakage from the village has been minimal. Because, you see a truck or a tractor load of grain arriving in the village, it becomes very difficult for the local grain dealer then to siphon off in a large fashion. Bulk of the siphoning takes place because the grain doesn't reach the village. It goes straight from the FCI, go down to the mandi. And many states, you have a FCI rate as part of the commodity rate. It's not that FCI is releasing grain. It is there's a parallel market, which lot of Hindi newspapers in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, they carry the FCI mandi rate of wheat. It's the FCI rate. That means this is grain which has gone from the FCI go down, not to the shop, but to him, to the retail dealer. So this is something which, so if you can spend, and we estimate it costs about 800-900 crores of compulsory door delivery. The government of India has been asking the states to do it. The states are saying, why should we do it? I don't have money. But collectively, we are spending about 60,000 crores. This 1,000 crores could, reduce leakage by 5-7%, something which we can certainly do. So in summary, there are policy options across the board from very radical to doable without dismantling the structure. And it's the kind of debate that you raised, which will hopefully lead to a better system. Thank you.